Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to today's video. I have a book stack behind me, so you guys know what that means. It's time to get out your TBRs and add more books to them. So focus of today's video is fantasy standalones. I feel like as fantasy readers, there are, you always have multiple series that you want to read, whether it's new series that you want to get into or older series that you just missed on and never read, or you could be a reader like me and you're the type of person that always has at least 15 series on the go at a time. So in terms of fantasies, I feel like we all have series covered, but sometimes what we're craving actually is a fantasy standalone. And those I feel like just aren't as common in the fantasy genre. So today, we're going to talk about 10 fantasy standalones that I absolutely love, but these are also fantasy standalones that I do think are good enough to be series. For one reason or the other, either they leave me actually wanting more, like they're very satisfying and conclusive, but they do leave me just wanting more pages with either the characters or the world's really cool, so I want to like stay in it longer. Or these could be stories that just, they do feel like they're all encompassing, and by the end of the book, it does feel like you have read an entire series just by looking at how much you've experienced and the journey you've went on. So that's today, as usual. Grab a snack, grab a drink, get comfy, and let's talk about these fantasy standalones. All right, top of the stack. This book is so good. This book is so good, and I do feel like it is kind of known, but at the same time, I also feel like it's kind of underrated. So this is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. Now, I do know quite a lot of people have read this book, but I just think in terms of M.L. Wang, I feel like Blood Over Brighthaven gets, all the praises, and we all forget that she actually wrote Sword of Kaigen as well, and this book I honestly loved even better than Blood Over Brighthaven. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion or not, but I always hear of people talking about Blood Over Brighthaven, which is also an incredible read. I also did give it a 5-star, but I think I actually like The Sword of Kaigen better. So let's talk about this one. I tend to describe this one as Avatar: The Last Airbender meets the Poppy War, which is kind of a wild combination, but it really works here. So I think the magic system and the world really does remind me of Avatar: The Last Airbender. We have elemental magic, but not just elemental magic. Like, we really are manipulating elements, like taking water that exists in the environment and shaping it into something, and manipulating weather, and there's kind of like manipulating storms and stuff like that. So that really feels Avatar: The Last Airbender. And then in terms of comparison to the Poppy War, the story of this book is based on kind of similar historic events as the Poppy War was based on. So we do get kind of similar feeling events happening in this one that we get in the Poppy War. That definitely adds, a little bit more of a heavy feeling to the story and the world. And the combination of the two, I think, really, really works in here. So we follow two main POVs in this book. Our first is Mamoru, and he is a teenager. He's currently training at this like fighting academy. He comes from a really, really known family of warriors, and so he just wants to train, become a really great warrior, and kind of live up to his family name. So that's his story. And then we also follow his mother, who actually came and like married into the family, came from a different place in the world. And as we see her journey, we start learning more of her past and seeing that she has more behind her, like inside of her and in her past, than we think. And she actually had a really, really different upbringing compared to the woman, the mother she is today. Both character perspectives are so interesting. They're very different, and I think it really, really works in this book because they're so connected. We're following a mother and a son, so obviously, they're close. Their lives, their journeys are very closely interconnected, but as individuals, their paths go in such different directions. In the overall story, we do have this major theme of lifting the veil, kind of. So we're set in Kaigen, and Kaigen is this island. They seem very isolated, and they are very deep rooted in tradition, and they're very much people who want to carry that tradition forward, but because of that, they seem to, be losing touch, with the rest of the world. Their foreign relations, that aren't really great. They're not very connected, and so throughout the story, we dig deeper into that and see, what is the difference? What is the actual truth of the world versus what is the truth that your current government or leaders are trying to tell you. Really wonderful book, really incredible writing. ML Wang is the type of author that will pull you in to a character immediately. I remember after reading the first 13 pages of this book, I was like, I'm already so attached to Mamoru because he is the first character that we meet, and I was like, I love him already. I care so deeply for him immediately right off the bat, and I wish there was more in this world. It is such a rich feeling world, and while this story focuses on Kaigen, this world feels so full. Like, we do get glimpses into other regions, other countries, you know, what's happening across the world, and so I feel like there's so much that we could explore outside of Kaigen, but like, you know, in the same world. This book definitely works incredibly as a standalone. It's very conclusive. It has a very satisfying ending, but I just want more in this world. The funny thing is about this book, I'm pretty sure ML Wang did write stories that are also set in the same world before she wrote The Sword of Kaigen. It's called the Theonite series or something, and there are 2 books that she wrote. I'm not sure if those are set before the story or after chronologically, but I think the Theonite books are actually, I don't know, they're like hard to find, hard to access, hard to like get access to. I was trying to look on Goodreads to like get more information on those Theonite books, and like less than 1,000 people have read both Theonite books. So I don't really know what the deal is with those. I don't know if she will ever come back to this world and write, you know, more of those Theonite books or go into like another part of the world. I feel like that would be so incredible. But yeah, as a fantasy standalone, The Sword of Kaigen is incredible. I would recommend it to any fantasy lover. I actually have 2 Brandon Sanderson standalones on this list. So if you're looking to get into the Cosmere and you don't want to dive into a series immediately, I know most people recommend starting with something like Mistborn, and hardcore Cosmere fans would say to not read these books right away. I don't know. I feel like you could still read these standalones and read the series after, and you would still get some of the Cosmere connections like I did. But the first Brandon Sanderson standalone that I would recommend, and I also think I want this to be a series actually, is Warbreaker. Now this, I think I've heard rumors that Brandon Sanderson will be working on a second Warbreaker book. I don't know what the details on that are. I don't know if that timeline will happen right after Warbreaker, how connected it'll actually be, or if it'll read more like an interconnected standalone, kind of set in the same world, but 1,000 years later, something like that. But I will say Warbreaker does definitely read as a standalone, and even if Warbreaker 2 comes around, I feel like you could probably still read this as a standalone and you'd be okay. But this is just, it's a really cool fantasy world. So Brandon's magic systems tend to work in a very similar way across his books. So the mechanics of it in the most basic terms are, you find a source of magic, you suck it up, you convert it into something else, and then, you know, it manifests as magic. So in this particular world, the source of magic is color and breath, and when you combine color and breath, you can do magical things. This world is also really interesting in terms of kind of what they worship and what they see as gods. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but you need to just read the book to find out. I think what they did with worship and all of that was really interesting in this book, but the main story of it is we do follow a couple different characters, but our kind of main story that we follow is we have a princess from like a smaller village, and she's been sent to the main capital city, the kingdom, to marry the god king. And with all this happening, we're also trying to prevent war, we're trying to keep our kingdoms running, we're trying to prevent starvation in the villages and all of that. So very classic feeling fantasy, but we do get some very interesting points of view. So one of our POVs is the princess who's being sent, one of them is her sister, one of them is, I don't know how to describe him. He's just like a really cool guy who is really good at the magic in this world, and he's kind of tied into, I don't know, the more seedier criminal side of the kingdom. And then we do follow one of these like god figures in this book. This is one of those standalones that you can't really believe is a standalone because the world feels so detailed. Like the magic system, the way everything works is so set in place with so many rules and little things. Like, you know exactly how the magic works. It actually is a story that while I was reading through, when I was getting to like the last 100 pages of this book, or even the last 50 pages of this book, I was just thinking, are we sure this is as a standalone because it seemed like we had so many loose ends to conclude within the last 50 pages, and I was just skeptical. I was like, there's no way we can conclude everything, but I will say by the end of the book, surprise, surprise. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at this point with Brandon Sanderson, but everything, yeah, did feel very concluded in a very satisfying way at the end of the book. You could call this kind of not exactly a standalone also because we do see some of these characters and elements of this book in other parts of the Cosmere. Specifically, I noticed a lot of overlap with the Stormlight archive, but in terms of like this book itself, you could totally read it as a standalone. It is technically a standalone. I mean, I don't know what the future plans with Warbreaker 2 apparently are, but like I consider this to be a good standalone read. So this one is great. There's also by Mr. Brandon, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. This and Warbreaker are my favorite standalones from him. I really do love them. I think this one I liked even better, but essentially in this one we follow two characters. We have Yumi and of course we have the Nightmare Painter as said in the title, and they're both very different characters from very different worlds. So Yumi is kind of this, she's also kind of this god figure, I guess. Not really a god figure, but she's kind of treated as a vessel to God. Like people will watch her pray and meditate, and that's kind of how they like give respect to their gods. So Yumi is this kind of religious figure, you could say, in her world, and she's very limited to her routine. Like everyone expects her to wake up at the same time, get bathed, eat the same thing every single day, and then just meditate and stack rocks. And she has never really known anything else in the world. She's very obedient. That's just how she grew up. That's how she was trained. And then on the other side, on another planet, actually, we have the Nightmare Painter. And yeah, he's completely an opposite character. So his profession is he essentially hunts nightmares. So you could call him kind of a guard of their city, but Nightmare is also this kind of rogue character. He doesn't mind breaking the rules. He doesn't mind being like a little bit lazy and not doing everything he's supposed to. And throughout the book, I'm not going to tell you how the two of them get connected. They form this really wonderful connection with each other. I really do love how Brandon built these two characters that are so different, and throughout the journey, they teach each other things, you know, like the Nightmare teaches Yumi how to be a little bit more carefree, shows her kind of like different foods and different things she can enjoy. And then of course Yumi teaches the Nightmare Painter things as well. I loved this so much. I loved the bonds, I loved the friendship, I loved the character work in this, and the world also feels really just whimsical and magical in this one. This is my favorite whimsical book from Brandon because his series are definitely a little bit more serious. His standalones are always a little bit more whimsical, but I find when he gets whimsical, sometimes his writing just feels a little middle grade to me. And in this one, I found this to be the perfect balance of whimsical, but also keeping it adult-ish feeling. So I really do love this book. This one is most definitely a standalone. Again, very conclusive ending. But if you do want to see connections and not a direct continuation of the story, but kind of Easter eggs within the Cosmere, you will also be able to experience that if you read the rest of the Cosmere. So that's Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I'm so sorry. You're probably so sick of hearing me talk about this book, but I can't make a fantasy standalone video and not talk about The Poet Empress by Shen. I'm gonna try to be quick with this one because you've probably heard me say the plot synopsis for this over and over again, but this is a historical fantasy standalone. It's very dark. It's also not a romantasy, okay? This book has been published under Bramble, which I know is a mostly romantasy imprint, but please don't go into this thinking it's gonna be like an enemies to lovers romantasy. It's not. It's just a dark historical fantasy. But in this book, we follow Shen. She comes from a very poor village. Her village is on the brink of starvation. She's lost a lot of family members, but one day she gets the opportunity to become a concubine to the heir, the crown prince, to the throne, and she takes it. She's like, I need to do this. This is the one way that I could possibly help my family, help my village, marriage. And so she embarks on this journey. But the crown prince that she is now, really closely linked to, of course, is actually very, very cruel. And while we go on this story, we see as she learns more about this royal family, learns more about the characters, the cruel prince, his brothers, his father, what has happened with this royal family. And at the same time, she's also trying to navigate court politics, learn how to be a concubine, seeing the dangers of what it is to be a concubine. And she's also trying to learn poetry magic to try and take the kingdom down from within and just to like fix things, turn things around. She wants to be the voice from the small village that can help the small villages. Loved this so much. The writing, incredible. It's so poetic. It's so like mythic feeling. I always say this doesn't really feel like a typical fantasy. The plot is not really like an adventurous, fast-paced plot with so much going on all the time, but it is very much more a character study, a deep dive into royal families and sibling dynamics. And I just think this book is so masterfully done. Be prepared emotionally to jump into this one though. It is heavy. It covers a lot of heavy things. You will be torn morally throughout this entire read. It's not going to feel good, but it's going to be an incredible read. So this is The Poet Empress. I feel like I would just want more in this world because I feel like I know the politics and how this world works so intimately now that I just want to live more in this world and see what happens at the end of the story. It is, again, it's quite conclusive, definitely feels like a standalone, but I would just love to see Shen write more in this world. So we are having Shen on the pod. That episode should actually be up by the time this video is up. So if you're interested in seeing Shen talk more about The Poet Empress, we're going to make it a spoiler-free chat, but we will be, talking about themes and overall things of the book. Definitely check out the podcast. I feel like it's going to be a really great episode. But also speaking of authors that we've had on the podcast, this next fantasy standalone is so much fun. So this is A Stage Set for Villains by Shannon J. Spann. This book was so fun, and it's one of those books that I read and then I talked to Shannon after and I was like, yeah, it confirms why I love this book. So while reading this just felt like a love letter to acting, to theater, and as a theater lover myself, I loved every bit of this. So this, I would say, is an upper YA fantasy. We have this world that is divided into two. Half of our population really loves this theater called the Playhouse, and the other half doesn't. But the Playhouse, is essentially this moving, traveling theater that pops up every once in a while. And inside the Playhouse, we have the players, who are these godlike entities that essentially are actors, so they literally put on shows. Our protagonist, Riven, was actually kind of touched by this Playhouse when she was young, so she had an encounter with a player, and ever since that encounter, she has been sort of cursed. Her health has never been great. She has this very gaunt, skeletal-like appearance, and she's just not in good health. Everything always hurts. She's always sick. She's not capable of getting through an entire day without pain. And so Riven, obviously hates the players. One day though, at the beginning of the story, the Playhouse announces that they're hosting this big spectacle where mortals, mere human mortals, can enter the theater, enter this contest to try and win. And essentially when you're the winner, you have to kill a player and then take their place. But the great thing is when you take a player's place, you literally become an immortal. So obviously our main character Riven gets involved in this in one way or the other, and she starts seeing this competition as a way to help cure her curse, because she's like, well, if I'm immortal, I can't be cursed anymore, right? So that's the premise. This book is so much fun. I like to compare this one to like Caraval, Once Upon a Broken Heart, plus The Night Circus. It's very whimsy. It's very dedicated to the bit in terms of like, yes, this is a theater book. The magic system is entirely based on acting method. It's just so much fun. I love what Shannon did with this world. It's so creative. There is a romance in this, and the main like guy gives me Jax vibes from Once Upon a Broken Heart. So like, if that doesn't convince you to read this book, I don't know what will. I loved it. There was some fun play with format in this book too that I'm not going to tell you too much about. But in terms of me wanting more in this world. I do think that this book ended a little bit open-ended. And it's not an open end that is frustrating and is like, oh my goodness, like, oh, like I don't feel satisfied. It definitely felt satisfying because I feel like with the vibe of this book, an open ending was kind of the only way to conclude the story, with kind of the theme of acting and everything being so mysterious and artistic and everything. I feel like the ending was perfect for the vibe of this book, but it also left me thinking like, maybe more could happen here. We did talk to Shannon about it. She did mention that while she has no plans right now to like write more in this world, she's also not opposed to the idea. She definitely has ideas, thoughts about, you know, what is happening in this world. So there's a possibility that we could have more, maybe like interconnected standalone to a stage set for villains. But yeah, I loved this. It was so fun. Oh, this next book is so good, and I think severely underrated. So this is The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door by H.G. Parry. This is a historical fantasy standalone. And when I say historical, I mean actual very historical. So this is one of those fun worlds that is based in our real world, but if our real world had magic. So we're set in 1920. We're in England during World War I, but essentially this book is World War I if it had fairies, and also we have an academic school setting. So our main character is Clover. She's always been very smart. She's always been very studious, but she comes from not a very wealthy background, not a very wealthy village. At the beginning of the story, her brother gets sent to war. He enlists and goes out to battle, but while he is out at battle, he gets injured. And when he comes home, it's very clear that his injury is not a normal injury. Clover and her family find out that he has been hurt, he has been cursed by a fairy. And this is very surprising because in this alternate version of our world, magic is not very widely known. It's only known by a certain elite. It's only known by the wealthy. The majority of the population don't know that fairies exist. But because her brother has been cursed directly, now they know, and they're kind of sworn to secrecy too. Like they can't really spread the word or they'll be dealt with. Clover, in attempts to try and find a cure for her brother, tries to enlist at Camford, which is a mix between Cambridge and Oxford, but make it magic school. She does actually get in, but now she has to navigate this school that she doesn't really belong in. Everyone else who is attending the school is very wealthy. They all know each other. They're all from like these very connected, elite, wealthy families. And so Clover feels very out of place, but she does find a group of friends, and we just follow her as she adjusts to the school, faces injustices that are brought upon her because of her upbringing, also because she's a female trying to study. And we also see as she, tries to get down to the bottom of fairy curses and tries to find a cure for her brother. So I love this story so much. It is very wide spanning, and I think in that way this book almost gave me the feeling of a series, but in a standalone, because our time span is really long. So we do see Clover at the school, and then we do jump forward in time to when she's an adult. And I think because of just like the long spanning timeline of this book, it did almost feel like we went on a series along with these characters. I love these characters so much. I think the school setting was really well done. This is a school where we actually go to school. You know what I mean? It's not just a school setting for the vibe, for the aesthetic. We actually go to class and need to do assignments and need to study. And in that way, the school setting felt so realistic. It's the best type of school setting that I like to read when you're actually like doing school stuff. And yeah, just the dynamics between the friend group and seeing them as they meet each other, get to know each other, and then seeing them 10 years later in their adulthood and see how they've changed, I think was really well done. This was incredible. I want H.G. Parry to just like write more of this world, this alternate universe of if life was normal, we follow these really real historical events, but just with a tiny magical twist. Like, how about if there were fairies? So this is a wonderful fantasy standalone as well. You've probably heard of this next book, but it's just another one that I can't make a fantasy standalone video without mentioning this. But The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab, of course. Another historical fantasy, actually. I do feel like I really enjoy historical fantasies, but this is a very long-spanning story, in case you haven't heard of it. We follow Addie LaRue. The beginning of the story is like 1400s, 1500s France? Are we that far back? No, I was so completely off. We're 1714 in France. I clearly don't know my world history, but we follow Addie. She is from a small village in France in 1714. She's been very much like confined to her life in the small village. She's also, you know, arranged in a marriage, and she's just like, I want out of this life. So at the beginning of the story, she makes a deal with this devil, just asking for freedom. You know, she just wants to live her life the way she wants to live her life. And the devil's just like, you know, yeah, I can give this to you. But of course, the devil has his tricks. So to give Addie her freedom that she wanted, he actually puts this, I guess you could call it a curse, where she can be immortal. She can live forever. She never ages. She stays young forever. She never dies. She can do whatever she wants with her life. She is now free, but no one remembers her. Every single person she meets, including like her parents, including people she's known her entire life, forget her the second she leaves the room. So Addie is now, you know, is she really free? Like, she's good to go wherever she wants. She's not tied down by anyone, but when no one remembers her, what does that really feel like for her? What kind of a life is that really? So we follow Addie's story, and we span over hundreds of years of her immortal life. And it's just a story. Like, we get so deep into her feelings. It's so personal. It's one of those fantasies that, again, feels very much more like a character study over time versus like a high stakes, fast paced adventure plot. But I love this book so much. I read it, I reread it, I loved it even more on the reread. And this is another one. This is another one that there is an ending that feels good, but it's also like a little open-ended, and it does make you crave more about these characters. Like, I personally want to know where our characters are now and like what actually happened after the end point of this book. So yeah, it's a wonderful standalone. It gets you thinking about things, but also is good enough to have more books if V.E. Schwab ever wanted to come back to these characters. Okay, this next one is such a fun one, and you could argue this is definitely a sci-fi and not a fantasy, but I think it belongs in this video anyways. So, The Last Contract of Isako by Fonda Lee, a new release, but I loved this so much. It was so fun. It was so creative. I love what Fonda Lee has done with this world. In this book, we are on a different planet. We're not on Earth. It is sci-fi because as a population, we're trying to terraform this new world to be habitable for humans to live on comfortably. And because of this, the entire world is so interesting. It functions as one company. So if you live on this world, you're working for the same company as everyone else who's living on this world, and everything you do is controlled by your job. Like, your entire life, you live by the code. The tagline of this story is live by the code, die by the knife, and that is like a present, very, very present like motto that we explore through the entire story. So we have Isako as our main character. She is a swordswoman, which means she has like different tasks that she does. She's essentially a guard, but she also does other things for one boss. But she's essentially kind of like a personal bodyguard, but also an advisor to this person who is very high up in the company. In a twist of events, the person that she's a swordswoman to retires, and that leaves Isako without a job as well. But then she gets an offer from the competitor, like her previous boss's rival, gets an offer that she can't refuse, and this brings her into this story of corporate samurai espionage, and it's so much fun. This world is really eerie. It's really off-putting feeling, but in, you know, a way that is really wonderful to read. This world reminds me of Severance. Like, everyone is so die-hard working for the company. Just the way that they have divided all of the departments of this company too kind of give me Severance vibes. And the way everything is set up, like, you're not really supposed to have that much of a personal life or personal connections. Your entire being is dedicated to terraforming, to the goal of the company. And I loved the story so much. Fonda Lee is someone who will surprise me with plot every single time. She is someone who will surprise me with characters every single time. And I really loved Isako in this book. Fonda Lee decided to make her this middle-aged character who is past her prime, whose body is giving out, her knees are aching. And it was just so interesting seeing this type of like a high stakes story, but told through a protagonist who is is not, you know, a young teenager coming into her powers and coming into her prime. Like, Isako has been through it all. She's been through a life. She's on the brink of retirement. She's doing like one last job. And I found that perspective to be so interesting to read about while going on this corporate espionage adventure. There was definitely a lot of self-reflection, thinking back to like the things you've done in your life, thinking about, I don't know, things you regret, things you're happy about. And this book was so much fun. I would love to see Fonda write more in this world. Actually, it is such like a well-developed world for a standalone that I would just love to spend more time on this planet. So while this book is a standalone, yeah, I wouldn't complain if we had more. We obviously need an R.F. Kuang in this list, right? So my favorite R.F. Kuang fantasy standalone is Babel. And I think this is another book that is just, it's good enough that it could be a series if it wanted to be. Babel is very much a standalone though, unfortunately. But this does historical fantasy in a similar way to The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door that I was just talking about. We also, of course, have an academic setting in this one. So we start the story in, what year is it? 1828. We follow Robin, who was born in Canton. He became an orphan at a very young age, and then he was adopted by a very wealthy English man, and he was brought over to London to live with him. Essentially, this guy who adopted Robin is like, you could stay here. I'll give you a nice, cushy, comfortable life. All you have to do is study, make sure you're smart, make sure you get into Oxford, and study languages. So Robin's like, okay, I mean, like, I don't have any other choice, but sure. So he does grow up under his adopted father. He does get into Oxford, and it's another one of those stories where you like slowly see the veil being lifted. We see our characters dealing with prejudices that are in the academic system. We lift the veil on all sorts of issues going on in the world politically. And I haven't even explained the magic system to you, but essentially we're in our real world, but if we had a little bit of magic, and the source of magic is silver. Essentially, you can use silver to power anything. It kind of seems like they're using silver for electricity, kind of like you can power cars, it can power machinery, silver can just power things. And the way to activate the magic power in silver, you need to do a translation. And I'll let R.F. Kuang explain to you how that works when you read the book, but all of it has to do with translation and how things translate from one language to another and how meanings can be lost along the way. I found that to be a really, really interesting thing to just like dive into in this book. I know nothing, next to nothing about languages or linguistics. And so I definitely learned a lot of new things while reading this. And it's another world that just feels so interesting that I'm like, I would love to dive further into this world, spend more time in it, even though this was definitely, again, very conclusive as a fantasy standalone. But this was, really, really great. And then our last chunker of a fantasy standalone is actually Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. One could argue that this is not technically a standalone anymore because there are interconnected prequels in this world now, but I still honestly, even though I've read one of the prequels to this world and I loved it a lot, I would still consider this to be a standalone. And you could treat the prequels as bonus material if you want them. I will say the prequel, A Day of Fallen Night, I actually loved it even more than Priory of the Orange Tree. So if you do read this, I would recommend going to the prequel, but again, it's not necessary. Like, this book definitely reads as its own standalone. There is just other material to consume in this world if you so choose to. This book is always kind of hard to describe for me because it's one of those just all-encompassing high fantasies where you follow multiple POVs of characters that come from all walks of life, from all edges of the world. But what I can say is this book has dragons. This book has an impending feeling of like a big bad rising again and coming back to destroy the world. And we just see our characters from all walks of life trying to deal with this like impending doom of a big bad coming back. And the way they all deal with it is so different because they come from, different kingdoms, different religions. Religion plays a very, very heavy theme in the books in this world. And we definitely go into the effects of that, of like when you stick to one religion for so long and that's all you know, that could be limiting you in many ways. And again, it's another lifting the veil kind of a book. I feel like a lot of fantasies do that, but I love how it's done every single time. There are little romantic subplots in this book as well. I think Samantha Shannon weaves in like slow burn romance really nicely, really smoothly into her fantasy books. And I would say reading this book feels like you're reading a series because I mean, it's so long, but it is, you know, it's very epic fantasy feeling. It scratches that high fantasy itch, but if you want to feel that like big epic journey feeling fantasy, but you don't necessarily want to dive into a full series or commit to a full series, you could just pick up this chunker of a book and you get that feeling, but in just one long book versus like spread out into multiple. But yeah, I loved this one as well. And yeah, clearly this fantasy standalone was good enough to be a series because Samantha Shannon eventually did decide to write more in this world and was very successful in doing so. So that is Priory of the Orange Tree, and that is the 10th and final fantasy standalone that I planned to talk about today. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some fantasy standalone recs that maybe weren't on your TBRs before. If you did like this video, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your favorite fantasy standalone is. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!